Overcome adversity to find. True peace is not a message about comfort, but about confrontation with reality itself. Letters from a Stoic reveals how true peace is not discovered in perfect conditions, but forged inside the mind under pressure and uncertainty. In the writings of Seneca, one of the most influential Stoic philosophers of Rome, suffering is not treated as an enemy, but as material for inner strength and clarity. Stay calm is not a suggestion here, but a survival mechanism for the mind under emotional pressure. The more life feels unstable, the more this principle becomes essential for preserving mental balance in the middle of chaos and uncertainty. But there is something most people never notice about calmness. It is not a reaction. It is a skill built through repeated internal decisions. What if the real reason suffering feels uncontrollable is not the events themselves, but the way the mind silently amplifies them without permission? And if that is true, what would happen if those internal patterns could actually be rewritten? A deeper mechanism is hiding beneath everyday reactions, and what comes next reveals why most attempts to find peace fail before they even begin. The invisible noise of the modern mind. The mind is louder than the world. What creates suffering is rarely the event itself, but the constant interpretation that follows it, multiplying meanings that were never truly there. In Letters from a Stoic, Seneca exposes this hidden distortion of perception, showing how human beings often transform neutral reality into emotional chaos through unchecked judgment. The real problem is not what happens outside, but how quickly the mind builds narratives around it. A delay becomes disrespect. A silence becomes rejection. A challenge becomes threat. This automatic escalation creates a constant state of internal tension, even when life is objectively stable. Stoic discipline interrupts this pattern by forcing a pause between event and reaction. That pause is where clarity lives. Without it, the mind reacts as if every situation demands urgency, draining emotional energy on problems that often exist only in interpretation. But this is only the surface of the issue. There is a deeper illusion shaping this noise, and almost nobody notices it until it starts controlling their entire emotional world. The next layer reveals why even awareness of this noise is not enough to stop it. The illusion of control and the weight of the imagined. Control is often what destroys peace, not what protects it. Much of human anxiety is built on a quiet refusal to accept the limits of influence. The mind expands its reach beyond action into outcomes, trying to manage what has not yet happened and may never happen. In Letters from a Stoic, Seneca dismantles this illusion by drawing a clear line between what is truly within human power and what exists beyond it. The Stoic perspective does not deny responsibility. It sharpens it. Action belongs to the individual, but results belong to forces far larger and more unpredictable. The tension begins when attention shifts from effort to outcome, creating emotional dependency on variables that cannot be controlled. This dependency turns imagination into a source of suffering. Future scenarios are rehearsed as if they are already real, and each imagined failure is experienced emotionally before it even exists. The result is exhaustion without action, fear without event, and resistance without cause. Stoic training breaks this cycle by redirecting focus back to present decisions. Not what might happen, but what can be done now. Not prediction, but precision. This shift does not remove uncertainty, but removes its power over the mind. Yet even this separation is not the final layer of the struggle. There is still a hidden battlefield where most people lose their peace without even realizing it. The next topic reveals where the real conflict actually takes place. The inner court, where everything is decided. Nothing outside you decides how you feel, only your judgment does. The most overlooked battlefield in human experience is not external conflict, but the internal courtroom where every event is interpreted, labeled, and emotionally sentenced. In Letters from a Stoic, Seneca repeatedly returns to this idea. Suffering is not imposed by reality, but by the verdict the mind gives to reality. A single criticism can become humiliation or guidance depending on interpretation. A failure can become identity destruction or practical feedback depending on internal framing. The event remains the same, but the emotional consequence shifts entirely based on the story constructed around it. This is where most people unconsciously lose control. They treat their interpretations as facts instead of choices. Once a judgment is accepted without question, emotion follows automatically, locking the mind into reactions that feel unavoidable but are actually self-produced. Stoicism introduces a radical interruption in this process: the ability to question the first interpretation, not to suppress emotion, but to examine whether the emotion is justified by reality or manufactured by assumption. This creates space between perception and conclusion, and in that space, emotional freedom begins to form. But even awareness of this inner courtroom is not enough unless it is paired with something deeper, an entirely different way of relating to adversity itself. The final layer reveals how peace is not defended, but constructed. The construction of peace. That no circumstance can destroy. Peace is not found, it is built where nothing external can reach. The final teaching in Letters from a Stoic is not about escaping adversity, but about becoming structurally independent from it. Seneca does not promise a life without disruption. He reveals a way of existing where disruption no longer defines the inner state. True stability emerges when the mind stops negotiating with reality and starts aligning with it. Adversity, in this view, loses its power to destabilize because it is no longer treated as a violation of how life should be. Instead, it becomes raw material for awareness, patience, and judgment. What once triggered emotional collapse becomes an opportunity to strengthen internal order. This shift is not emotional suppression. It is emotional independence. The difference is subtle but decisive. Suppression fights reality, while independence stops depending on it. One creates tension, the other creates clarity. At this point, peace is no longer a reaction to external conditions. It becomes a structure built through repeated decisions to return to reason instead of reaction, to observation instead of interpretation, to presence instead of projection. Over time, this structure becomes stable enough to remain intact even under pressure. And here lies the answer to the question opened at the beginning. Why do some people remain calm while others collapse under the same circumstances? The difference was never in the world outside, but in the architecture of the mind itself. What Seneca ultimately leaves behind is not comfort, but a quiet form of freedom, one that cannot be taken, only practiced, until it becomes permanent. The calm that survives everything. Calm is not the absence of chaos, but the refusal to be ruled by it. What Stoicism ultimately reveals is that peace was never something to be achieved after life becomes stable, but something to be trained inside instability itself. In Letters from a Stoic, Seneca dismantles the illusion that external order is required for internal order, showing that the two have never been truly connected. Once the mind stops treating adversity as a threat to identity, something subtle but irreversible happens. Events lose their emotional dominance. Pain can still exist, loss can still happen, pressure can still rise, but none of it automatically becomes suffering. Suffering becomes optional, created only when judgment reactivates old patterns of resistance. This is where the transformation becomes visible in real life. The same situations that once caused collapse begin to feel lighter, not because they changed, but because the internal response no longer escalates them. A kind of distance appears, not emotional numbness, but emotional clarity. And within that clarity, something unexpected emerges. Space. Space to think before reacting. Space to choose instead of impulsively responding. Space to remain steady even when everything around is not. The final realization is simple, but it changes everything. Peace was never hidden in perfect conditions. It was hidden in the ability to stay unchanged by conditions. And when this is fully understood, the loop closes. What seemed like a search for peace outside was always a training of perception inside.